Thank you very much for joining. We've got a large number of attendees today, so I do appreciate everyone joining on this call. What I'd like to do is run through a little bit about Occuity, what we're doing, where we are commercially now, where we are with the technology, long-term plans, and of course something about the funding round as well. So as you know, we're Occuity. We have a very revolutionary optical technique for making measurements on the eye. We've got a whole range of health conditions, but in every case using the eye as the window into the health of the body. To deliver on this, we put together a very strong management team. So the two founders of the company, myself and Robin Taylor. My background is a PhD in micro-optics, making very, very small optical systems. Robin's is in biomedical engineering. His PhD was making a special drill to drill into the skull for cochlear implants. So a very strong technical background, and his name is on pretty much all our patents, and his ideas feed into all of our engineering and technology. Around the board, we also have Mark Jenkins and Daniel Quirk. Mark Jenkins is now our CEO, moved over from COO, so he runs all the commercial work we're doing. Very strong background in founding, growing, exiting his own companies. And similar to Daniel Quirk, who's our non-exec director, he's founded, grown, exited medtech companies as well. So a lot of experience of creating value from high-tech, high-growth entities. Sharon Branch is our COO, Chief Operating Officer. Her background is in regulatory and finance, a lot of experience there. So she really now runs the engineering team and all the quality and regulatory systems in the company. Claire Mitchell's our head of finance, strong background in working for a number of high-tech, high-growth companies. She joined us at the start of this year. And finally, Daniele Diulias, who's our design director. He's ex-Apple, was a main board reporter over 27 years. And it's his ethos that drives Apple's products, iPhones, iPads, that sort of thing. And you can see that kind of thought process carrying through into the Occuity product range as well. So around the top team, we now have a total of about 35 staff in the company. Not only the engineering anymore, so we now have engineering and R&D, of course, but also manufacturing, quality and regulatory, sales and marketing, finance, all the areas you need for a high-functioning, high-growth company that's actually now on market and selling products. So that gives you a feel for the leadership team and the company in general in terms of its HR functions. As I say, what we're doing is working on making measurements on the eye. This is now called oculomics. So it's the use of the eye to detect biomarkers for a whole range of conditions in the body, not only ophthalmic conditions, but also systemic conditions like diabetes and Alzheimer's as well. But in every case, we use the eye as the window into the body. And systems work by taking light and shining it into the eye. So we shine a beam of light into the eye, take the reflection out and analyze that. And depending on how you analyze that signal, it tells you either about dimensions of the eye for optometry, hence the PM1 and the X1, or you take markers in, typically the lens of the eye for devices like the SD1 for screening for diabetes and the G1 for measuring glucose levels in the eye. So our primary markets are optometry and systemic. Glaucoma and myopia are two areas in optometry we're looking at first of all, but then moving forward into diabetes and Alzheimer's being some real blockbuster opportunities for Occuity because it's such global problems. So technology is really the core of everything we're doing. It's a platform technology that we're using for all of the product ranges. It underpins everything we're making. It's protected by 15 patents. There are 15 patents there, 14 granted and 1 pending. And these are international patents. So we file in the UK first of all, always file in Europe and America as well. And key patents also filed in India, China and Japan too. And this underpins really the technology. And there are a number of USPs to technology. Because the device is optical, they're all non-contact and handheld. So the devices are very compact, handheld and portable, so you can take the measurements out to the patient to make it more convenient. They're non-contacting, so you don't need, for example, in diabetes, to draw blood to make the measurement, or an optometry contact the eye to make the measurement. So much more comfortable for the patient and faster for the clinician as well. And having no contact with the patient, there are no consumables. So environmentally, the devices are more friendly as well. I'm using these machines to address a number of market areas. First of all, of course, ophthalmology. If you're measuring the eye, ophthalmology is the first thing you want to understand. Building on from there, we're looking at measuring glucose levels of people with diabetes in their daily lives. So that's a very large market worth about $17 billion now. And then moving on to screening for diseases, and diabetes and Alzheimer's being the first two opportunities there. And we believe those are worth about $20 billion each. So we're looking at opportunities in total that are worth over $40 billion per year in value. Our first product, though, is the PM1 pachymeter. That is now on market and selling in about 19 countries. And the primary use for that is really measuring the eye for measuring the corneal thickness for glaucoma and for LASIK surgery and those things. The reason we're doing this is that for glaucoma, there are something like 110 million people in the world with glaucoma. And about half of the people with glaucoma don't know they've got it. So screening for condition is very important. And there's no cure for the condition. Once you've got it, you need to manage it. So ongoing measurements are important as well. The PM1 is the device that does this. It's the world's first handheld non-contacting optical pachymeter, and it measures corneal thickness in a matter of seconds. You just hold it up to the patient's eye and line it up, and a couple of seconds later, you've got data on the machine. So very, very fast and very, very easy to use. The primary areas of interest are glaucoma and refractive surgery, so measuring the corneal bed during LASIK surgery. We're also now seeing lots of interest in corneal cross-linking, so measuring the structure of the cornea as you correct for keratoconus. But the machine's been on market since the end of last year. We obtained CE marking in September last year and been selected since October. And it's now generating sales in a large number of countries. I'll come with that in a bit more in a second. Not only is it generating revenues, we're now getting repeat orders from a number of territories, UK, South America, and Germany in particular. And we're growing our sales now. So we're looking at growing sales to around 1,000 units per year, and that'll give us revenues of about $5,000 per year. So you can see, give a market price around $5,000 per unit. So you can see they're getting reasonable revenues from this, but not really earth-changing. That's where the next machine comes in. So the market for the PM1 really is addressing the currently established base of ultrasound pachymeters. These are devices which you need to contact the eye to make the measurements, so not liked by patients and slow to use by opticians. But there are something like 77,000 of those in the field. So we're gradually planning to replace those over the next number of years. So it's a replacement market very much for the PM1. But the key point of getting the PM1 to market, aside from it creating revenues and showing that we can do this, is it really demonstrates our ability to get a device through development, through clinical trials, through regulatory approvals, and onto market and into sales. And we've done that now with the PM1. We've also had to put together a manufacturing facility for this. So we've got a 13485 accredited manufacturing line in the Blade. We're based in Reading. We're manufacturing all of our PM1s ourselves, and that's a really big step forwards for a company like Occuity. It also means technology has been validated and developed in-house, and a lot of the engineering in the device, so looking at the casing, for example, the display, the batteries, a lot of the electronics, that carries through into future products like the AX1, which smooths the process, eases the regulatory profile, and means we can get to market more quickly with later products. But it also means we've grown a team around the product, so sales and marketing team, the regulatory and engineering team, the manufacturing team, having been through the process of the PM1 and now ready to build up for the AX1. So the AX1 should be a lot easier to market than the PM1 was. In terms of sales, put together a distribution network for the PM1 globally, and ophthalmic instrument distributors, and they will sell the AX1 as well. In fact, they're very excited about the AX1. So all those building blocks for a growing high-tech company are now in place. So that's the PM1, which is very much a stepping stone on the way to market. That's our first phase, get the first device on market and create revenues. That then leads into the AX1 for myopia. And myopia is a very much larger opportunity. So what we're doing there is measuring the axial length of the eye. So what happens is with a healthy, normal eye, the eye focuses down onto the retina and you see clearly. With myopia, what's happening now is with axial myopia, the eye grows to the extent that the light doesn't focus on the retina, so the person is short-sighted, but also that stretching of the eye causes damage to the retinal cells and causes problems in later life. And the issue with myopia is it's a major problem now globally. The predictions are that by 2050, half the world's population will have myopia, and more importantly, perhaps 1 billion people, almost 1 billion people, will have high myopia. So refractive error of more than -6 diopters. And the problem with that and the stretching of the retina means that will cause problems in later life. And 1 in 10 people with high myopia are predicted to have either blindness or suffer from severe vision impairment. So it's a very large problem and a very major problem for the person with high myopia. But fortunately, there are treatments which allow you to address myopia, and this is generally in childhood. So the goal here is you measure a child early on, know that they're myopic and have got an extended axial length of their eye, and you start applying these treatments early on. And the treatments are either contact lenses, ones you wear during the day or overnight, which are called ortho-K, special glasses which control the vision and stop the eye growing so much, or drops, atropine drops you put into the eye to help chemically affect the eye. But all these processes, if you use it early enough for children, can stop their eye growing and stop them becoming highly myopic in later life. So it's very, very important, therefore, to screen for myopia in all children and then address the condition and then monitor how effective the treatment regimes are. So monitoring axial length is really key to managing myopia, knowing the child's got it in the first place, but also managing the progression. But at the moment, all the machines which measure axial length are large desktop machines that are very expensive and too cumbersome high street practice. And that's really where the AX1 comes in. So the AX1 is the world's first handheld optical axial length meter. You can see exactly the same look and feel for the PM1, that's intentional. So we're using the same casing, same charging unit, same display, all those things. It means we can get the machine to market more quickly. And we're aiming to get to market in the first half of next year with this. It'll be rolling out throughout the year into various territories, but the goal is to get to market in the first half of 2026. We're not far from having a saleable product here. It's market disrupting. I say there's no real way of actual optometrists measuring axial length now effectively, whereas the X1 really allows them to. And we're in discussion with all the key players in the market. So in the myopia management area, we're looking at all the key players who are addressing this in terms of creating solutions. So Carl Zeiss, Cubivision, Topcon, Amatec, people like that. And the end users, the high street practices, with Specsavers, Filman Group in Germany, Boots Opticians in the UK, Hakim Group, people like that. So we're seeing interest from the end users, from the managers of myopia machines for doing that, and also for all our distributor chains. So there's a really big interest in this market. And that leads us to believe we can sell, we think, about 10,000 units per year of the X1. It's a very, very exciting product that everyone really wants. And at an end user price of $10,000, you can see those two numbers there give us a very large revenue stream from this next device. So we're currently at the stage we have TRL5 prototypes, so one step back from the pre-production units. We'll already be using those in clinical testing in-house with partners. We've done testing in-house in Reading. And you can see two machines here, so two existing machines for measuring axial length. The Harkstrite IOL, the Carl Zeiss IOL Master and the Harkstrite Lenstar. And you see the X1 is pretty much matching those machines in terms of measuring axial length for a range of lengths from 21 to about 29 millimeters. So it's working very well in prototype form. Not only does it measure the eye, when you get the results, it displays them on the screen on the back. So you get the data, you tend to make 3 measurements and you get the results on the screen. But it also displays a barcode. So you then transfer the information electronically into a data management system for patient control. And the one partner we're working with there is Ocumetra. So they make a software package used by optometrists and by the child's parents to understand how the child's eye is looking in terms of axial length and how they like to grow as they get older. So you put in the axial length of the eye, the age of the child, their gender, and tells you how their eyes like to change later on and whether they need a management regime for myopia or not. So very, very important to close the loop here, not to measure the eye, but manage the effects of the myopia as well in the child. So this is in terms of where we're heading to, a machine which is used by optometrists to measure every child if we can, and therefore screen them all and treat myopia widely. In terms of the roadmap, so we're aiming to get to market early next year or middle of next year with the X1. The current prototypes are showing very good correlation with the IOL Master and the Lenstar. We've just ordered 70 off components to make TRL 5.2s and TRL 6 devices, and they are being assembled now to be ready over the next few weeks. We then run those through all the laser safety testing, EMC testing, clinical trials, with the goal of having a data pack, a technical file we can submit to notified bodies towards the end of this year, early next year. And the route map there is to submit to the UK body, which is the UKCA, the FDA's body, the US body, the FDA, and the European body CE marking simultaneously. And they'll take different times to work through their approvals. So we should get UKCA marking first in summer next year, FDA approval autumn next year, and probably CE marking at the early part of 2027. But a phased rollout of the X1 in the various markets as we go through next year. And in terms of the opportunity and the interest in the X1, optometrists are obviously the main interest there. In the UK, we've got about 17,000 optometrists, but in the survey we did a year or so ago, only about 6% have access to a desktop biometer and measure axial length. So most of them are measuring refractive error and assuming axial length, which isn't the effective way of doing it. In the US, there are 44,000 optometrists. Only 13% have desktop biometers, so need something like the X1. And globally, there are over 330,000 optometrists. So you can see the scale of the market there is very, very large indeed. And measuring axial length and myopia management is really the key in optometry at the moment. And the World Council of Optometrists are now saying you should, as an optometrist, be measuring axial length, or you'll be not treating your patients as well as you should. So the demand is really there very much. As I say, there's 3 routes to market. We speak to the high street practices, Specsavers, Boots, Hakim Group, Filman Group, people like that, who are all very excited about this device. We've got a meeting with Specsavers next week. A distribution chain of 19 distributors want the X1. Many have asked for pre-production units, so there's new demonstrations and trade shows. So we're likely to get some early sales there. And in myopia management corporate, so the companies that make the contact lenses, the glasses, the treatments for myopia, companies like Carl Zeiss, Cubivision, and Topcon, we run demonstrations to those, and they're very excited about the X1. And in many cases, they want global exclusive rights to this device. So we're in discussion there about how we can optimize our revenue stream from collaborative deals on this machine. And again, we very much expect to sell 10,000 units a year of the X1 at a market price of $10,000. So you can see there the kind of revenue streams we're building up with this device. So our transfer price distributors, so $10,000 about £8,000 market price. Transfer price distributors is probably around £5,500, which leads to our revenue stream, something like this. So in 2026, we'll do about £3.5, £4 million-ish revenues from the X1 alone. In 2027, when it's on market for the whole year, about 15 million, and growing from there to about 57 million by the time we've got the 10,000 units per year sales. So very, very rapid growth and very high sales volumes and margins from the X1. Underpinning this, we're also doing a lot of work in the background on looking at myopia. We have a £1.6 million Future Leaders Fellowship program from the UK government supporting understanding better how myopia is caused, what leads to myopia, and it's generally children not being outside exposed to sunlight enough, and how the various treatment regimes or lifestyle changes work and affect that. This is a 5-year program of work. We're measuring children every 6 months in a local school, 150 children there, and we're seeing that with large desktop machines, rather like this device here, getting a child that's 4 or 5 years old to sit still in a machine for 5 minutes is very, very hard indeed, and many children simply can't be measured. They simply don't sit still well enough. Whereas the PM1 and the X1, ultimately, you hold it up to the eye, it measures in a few seconds, so it's far more effective and takes data from far more children. So it's exactly the machine that the market needs if you want to do a screening program on early school age kids. So that's where we're heading for this. In terms of our sales channels, our primary channel is via distributors. And we've now signed up 19 distributors globally, initially for the PM1, but for the X1 as well. So we're selling at the moment in pretty much all the European territories, both East, West, and Northern Europe, in South America, India, Australasia, including New Zealand, and we're in discussion with many other territories as well, including Saudi Arabia, South Africa, and China, and America. So we're adding about 1 distributor each month at the moment, that kind of sales level. The PM1 is the one that's being sold at the moment, so the market price for that is slightly under £4,000. Our transfer price distributors is around £2,500, and we're looking to say building up there at around 1,000 units per year. The X1 will sell end user price of £8,000, transfer price around £5,500 distributors, and we're looking at 10,000 units per year. So you can see sort of the volumes growing there. But again, the established distribution chain now is in place. So we've got a very clear route to market for those devices. But that's really just the optometry market, and that's really the starting of what we're doing. The oculomics projects are equally important, a bit more long term, but much greater in terms of their ultimate value. And our 2 areas of interest there are screening, first of all, for diabetes and Alzheimer's, and monitoring levels for diabetes primarily. But there are other aspects in the future as well, looking at certain conditions we can see via markers that appear in the eye. Now, the reason we look at diabetes screening and glucose monitoring for diabetes care is that diabetes really is a major global problem and is growing at a very rapid rate. There are currently something like 590 million people globally with the condition, and that's going to grow to 850 million people by 2050. So it's a large problem now, and it's growing at a large rate as well. And the problem with diabetes is what happens is the blood sugars don't stay at healthy levels, so they go too high and too low. So it's necessary that the patient measures their blood sugar on a regular basis to control that level of glucose. And that's normally done with a needle, either puncturing the finger and drawing blood onto a test strip, or with a patch on the upper arm where a needle pokes into the upper arm. All the current systems are needle-based and therefore have pain and inconvenience involved with them. The Occuity Indigo will be a completely non-invasive, pain-free device that just scans the eye to make the measurement. So it looks rather like a large pen that you touch the top and the measuring element pops up, which allows you to scan the eye and get the result of the measurement on the screen here. But also a wire to transfer the data to your phone, so we can then collect the data back in our central database and analyze that in more detail. And that means you can feed information back to the patient, look how their data is trending over time. If they're going too high for too long, for example, you can improve or change their treatment regime. If they're not testing enough, you can nudge the patient to test more regularly and therefore improve their personal care. But it also means you can collect data on a large number of individuals. There's 500,000 people now with diabetes, all measuring once a day at least, if not more. You collect that volume of data, you very rapidly get a large data set that has value, and it's a large amount of value in its own right. And the plan is then to use that to help understand population trends, improve treatment regimes, and help a large population of people with diabetes. So the data, as time goes on, becomes as valuable, if not more valuable, than the machines themselves. Now, the machine works by scanning the eye. What we do is we analyze the aqueous humor in the eye. So what happens is when someone eats sugar, glucose of some form, it raises the blood sugar, and that changes the glucose in the body because the blood carries the glucose around. The blood's carried around the glucose is carried around in the blood plasma. When the blood comes to the eye, there's a sieve mechanism, literally a filter that cuts out the red and white cells and lets the blood plasma flow through into the eye and form the aqueous humor. So when glucose changes in the blood, glucose also changes in the aqueous humor. And that change in glucose causes a change in optical density, the refractive index of the aqueous humor. So the glucose appears in the anterior chamber of the eye in the aqueous humor. The refractive index changes, and our confocal interaction techniques can measure that and measure that change. So you can track an individual's blood glucose change simply by looking at the eye. That's very important because you're doing it non-invasively and it's completely pain-free, so the person can measure as often as they like. And it's a very convenient, easy measurement. Moving on from measuring glucose in the eye, we're also looking at screening for diabetes and also Alzheimer's. What we're doing there is a system which would be rather like the slightly larger version of the PM1 or the X1, again used in high street practice by optometrists, pharmacists and GPs, but allowed to screen every patient that comes through. And the commercial model there is that we'll lease the machine or provide it as a monthly recurring revenue device or service model to opticians. They'll pay us for use of the machine. They'll charge patients to do the measurement. And if you go to Specsavers now, they'll offer you an OCT test and charge £10 for that. And most patients take up that test. So it's a model that works very well indeed and is well established. So the goal is you measure every patient regularly for the markers for diabetes and Alzheimer's. And for diabetes, the markers are advanced glycation end products, AGEs, and for Alzheimer's, they're amyloid plaques. But the importance is you can detect those markers at a very early stage before people start showing symptoms. So in diabetes, for example, we've got prototypes up now which are working and measuring people's eyes. We've done it on our staff in-house, measure patients from people from early 20s up to about 70 years old, and shown a nice linear change as you get older, as you'd expect, for those with diabetes having a much stronger signal than those without diabetes. So even our early stage prototypes are seeing and are able to distinguish people who are healthy, pre-diabetic and diabetic. And that's very important. The goal there is that if you can screen for diabetes and recognize those who are pre-diabetic, you can let them know that they're heading on that journey to becoming diabetic, get them to change their lifestyle and prevent that longer term progression, and therefore save them from all the side effects that diabetes cause. So our view here is that monitoring diseases at an early stage and preventing progression is far more important than letting somebody become diabetic and then treating them later on. So with these machines here, we're generally funded by government grants. We've got prototypes working in the laboratory. We're getting very early data, but they're very, very encouraging indeed, leading into products that will come to market in around 2029, I think. So those are the two market areas, ophthalmic and oculomics. Obviously, very large revenues here. In terms of the revenue scale, this table here gives you a feel for how we're coming to market with the various products and how they're creating revenues. So we came to market with the PM1 last year, and revenues last year around 270k in pounds. This year we'll do about 500k revenues primarily from the PM1. Next year, about £1 million revenues from PM1 and about 4 million from the X1s. That starts to roll out throughout the various territories. And once the X1's on market in all territories in 2027, it will be approaching 20 million of revenues just 2 years from now. And then once the oculomics products come online as well in 2029, we're looking at over 100 million of revenues. We're still investing very heavily in R&D throughout this phase, though, so we're spending an awful lot, so therefore our net gain is not so great. By 2029, we'll have earnings around £30 million. And that's kind of the goal we're looking at in terms of valuing the company for an exit. So that's kind of what we're aiming for, an IPO ideally around 2029. But to make this happen, we're doing another funding round now. We need to raise more cash to get the X1 over the line, become a product, and start creating revenues. We've done a lot of funding to date. We've raised over £9 million of investment funds, and we've had about £4 million of grants in total. Our last funding round we closed last year was at a pre-money valuation of 24 million. We raised £5 million in that round, giving an enterprise value post-money of around 29 million. We've got a small increase in valuation now this time. So our pre-money valuation this year is at 35 million, sorry. That's a small uplift from last time, but it's justified by the fact we're now on market with the PM1. We're seeing a lot of commercial traction with the X1, and the oculomic products all advanced over the last year. Our ordinary shares are EIS qualifying, so that tax break is available. We've got HMRC advanced assurance for those shares. Now, in the following round, for this round now, we've got following investments from our current investors, about 600k so far, and another 300k in discussion. So around a third of the way through the round so far. And the primary use of funds is really to grow the sale of the PM1, but to drive the X1 through its final stages of development, through approval and onto market, because the X1 is really transformational in terms of revenues for the company. We'll also continue to invest alongside the grants in our long-term oculomic projects, so the Indigo glucose meter and the screening device for diabetes and Alzheimer's. And we also plan to grow out our team, so there's a few key recruits there, and to have working capital and contingency in the company as well. So a rounded use of funds, with the primary goal being to get the X1 over the line and to grow sales of that product. In terms of return on investment, I mentioned we're looking at the goal being an IPO in 2029, that sort of time period. There are also options for trade sales. I had a couple of discussions, very light touch discussions with a few players around that. But I think ultimately maximizing value, an IPO is the best way of doing that. Because companies, medtech companies who are listed on stock exchanges, tend to get price earnings ratios over £30 actually 30 times their earnings. That's driven really by high growth potential, which Occuity will still have in 2029. So if we for Occuity price earnings of 20 times, we will see a enterprise value of almost £600 million. We see the share price around £400, which is about over a 13 times uplift on our current valuation in this round. So that's the kind of goal, is to aim for an IPO about 4 years from where we are now. So I really found that interesting. That's a run through of where we are in terms of our technology, our products, our commercial traction, our long-term goals. I mean, Occuity is a rather unusual entity. If you look at a lot of growth companies at this stage now, they've got sort of fairly conservative ambitions. We really have very high ambitions here, and if we can achieve all the things we're aiming for, we'll become the next UK medtech unicorn, and that really is our complete goal. So hopefully you found that interesting. Very happy now to answer any questions. Richard, do you want to share that part of the session? And I'll answer any questions about the company, our growth plans, our commercial traction, all of those things.
Cheers, Dan. Thanks for that. Yeah, we've got quite a few people on board, so we've got quite a few questions to go through. We'll try and keep it relatively brief as well. So let me just have a look at them. There's a few duplicate questions, so I need to have a look. Give me 2 seconds. Sorry. So first one, what kind of user feedback have you had from early tests with the AX1?
Yeah, very positive. So we've made a point of getting the prototypes out there in the field for machines being demonstrated to myopia management companies in America. They ran some small trials over there. We had a trade show in India where Richard demonstrated it on all their customers there. We were at Hunter Optical in the spring in the UK. So we've got quite a lot of input from, well, both the distribution chain and end user optometrists, and also key players in the myopia management market. It's pretty much universally very, very positive indeed. Everyone loves the way the machine is so easy to use. They're used to using desktop devices, which take a long time. They're very cumbersome. The speed of measurement, the ease of measurement. We had one machine out with a customer in New York State a month or so ago, who are measuring themselves with it and just collecting data. They're amazed how easy it is to learn how to use the device. And that's one of the key aspects of it. One of the goals with the AX1 is to have a machine where you can screen all children. And work with Moorfields, they want to have every child measured, where rather than the patient coming to a clinician's environment being tested, you get a machine out to schools and screen every child in every school. And the reason for that is you got kids, you get these little growth red books where you measure the height and weight of the child as they grow and make sure they're in the right sort of percentile of that growth chart. The Moorfields want that for accident as well, to make sure you catch myopia earlier and therefore prevent progression, rather than just having lots of people needing glasses later in life, like many of us do. So yes, the interest there is very high. Response is very, very positive in that both the ergonomics of the machine, its usability, its speed of use is very high. The one thing everyone's pushing for is interaction with patient management systems, getting the data off, and that's why we're now linking with Ocumetra to get data off in a QR code, so we can transfer it into the whole network. So not only do you measure a patient's eye, we then feed that information into the patient system. But yes, distributors, end users, myopia management leaders in the market are all very excited about how this is, and very impressed with how it works.
Dan. Yeah, obviously being a high myself, the AX1 is particularly close to my heart. My children are on Ortho-K, and hopefully will be tested with the AX1 soon. So yeah, we've got another question here. Are there tax incentives still available to eligible investors? For example, is EIS still available?
Yeah, indeed. So we've got 2 share classes: ordinary shares and preferred ordinary shares. The preferred ordinary shares have some extra benefits, but they're not EIS eligible and therefore more relevant for international investors. If you're a UK investor and UK taxpayer, the EIS tax breaks for ordinary shares are the right ones to have. So yes, we are eligible for EIS. We've actually gone to HMRC and got the advance assurance for that. So yes, that's all in place. So if you invest in Occuity via ordinary shares, you get the EIS tax break initially, and of course the benefits on exit as well. So yeah, that tax break is a very valuable one. We've made sure that's in place.
Dan, how do you expect this, going back to the AX1, how do you expect the AX1 sales to grow?
Yes, so interestingly, I think we'll get some sales even before the machine has regulatory approval. So all our distributors are very, very keen on this. Many have expressed interest in getting the device before it's approved for doing demonstrations with, for doing trade shows, not for clinical use, but so they can actually get interest in the market. We've actually already received some deposits on those as well. So I think by the end of this year, we'll get some machines going out into our distributor chain to make sure they can raise the profile of the market and get interest there. Our Our sales rollout is driven very much by regulatory approvals. As I mentioned in the talk, the UKCA marking is the fastest process, so we should have that summer next year. So via Bermoxwell, our UK distributor, we expect to be selling to the UK and a few other territories. We can use the UKCA as a stepping stone for by next summer. So some countries don't have their own approval process. They use either UKCA or CE or FDA and piggyback on that. So with the UKCA market, we'll sell into the UK. We can also then get into some of the countries that are kind of historically UK biased towards, like countries like India, Australia, New Zealand, places like that. So we'll roll out there first of all. FDA approval, of course, is very important. That will come through, we think, Q3, early Q4 next year. America is important because the USA is roughly half the world market in medtech devices. We need to be in there. So we want to get the FDA approval onto market in America as soon as we can. And then via CE market, which will come through 2027, we'll get sales into Europe as well and some other territories too. FDA approval is useful because lots of the world see FDA as being the gold standard. Once you get FDA approval, you then get South America very easily and the Middle East and the rest of the territories. So it's a paced rollout, but that kind of works reasonably well given that we can't manufacture 10,000 units straight away now. So we need to roll out manufacturing as well as the sales process. And that pace rollout of approvals actually matches our ability to roll out the scale of manufacturing. Manufacturing in-house, but that needs kind of increase in volume by the time we've got the X1 on market fully. You're on mute, Richard, I think.
Thanks, Dan. Why are you doing a crowdfunding raise? This feels more institutional to me.
That's a good question. I'm smiling at that. Yes, so institutions are very good, but they're a double-edged sword. So in institutional VCs, PE, those sort of people, they do provide lots of cash in one hit, which is very nice, but they come with strings attached. You know, a VC investor will want preferential rights. They'll want seats on the board. They'll want consent rights, so you can't do certain things without asking them. They'll want preferential shares where they have anti-dilution rights and double dip and exit and those kind of things. So although they're a great thing to have at some stage, it's best for a company to keep raising funds from angel investors, so everyone's sort of sharing pari-passu equally in the growth of the company, so both founders and investors for as long as possible. So we will work with VCs at some stage, and our intention is to do a Series A round towards the end of next year. We want to put that off working with VCs for as long as possible, so that we don't do that until we've got the X1 on market. We're creating enough revenue so that we've got the ability to keep going ourselves, and the VC money is a useful thing to have rather than being dependent on it. That way you can negotiate much more strongly. So yeah, I think VCs are a good place to go at some stage, but it's best to raise money from angels as much as for as long as you can. And that means both high net worths, successful investors, but also the crowd cubing and sort of Crowdcube and Seeders works very well as well. You get a large number of smaller retail investors because they're interested in, interested in diabetes or personal reasons for wanting to invest. That works quite well as well. We've had investors from, well, apart from our distribution chain, but also optometrists, people who know the ophthalmic market, people who work in hospitals, people who know the medtech market, know what we're doing and why we're doing it. And it's nice to have people involved who have got a personal interest in what you're trying to achieve rather than doing it purely for financial reasons.
Thanks, Dan. You kind of alluded to another question we've had with regards to, do you think you'll be doing more fundraising before exit? So I think you've answered that, but you'd like to add anything else?
Expand it slightly, yeah. So our intention has been to do a Series A VC round at some stage. Next year is the ideal time. So the PM1's on market now, creating some revenues. The X1 will create very large revenues, at which point the valuation inflection will be very high indeed. I believe there's no way if a company's making sort of tens of millions of revenue, it's not going to have much higher valuation. So we want to put off VC raising until we've got higher value. That's likely towards the end of next year. We work with a company called Oyster Venture Partners, who are now engaging with VCs to raise our profile, get them aware of us, so they can monitor our progress over the next year and see how we come to market. When we said we're going to come to market, how we start creating revenues, and at that point the VC round is okay. But the VC round really is one which allows us to accelerate the oculomics projects. If we slow those down, we could probably get to market with all those projects ourselves just by using free cash from the X1 sales. But to go to market quickly, and of course, time to market is a way of maximising values and maximising return to investors. A Series A round from VCs makes the most sense later on next year.
Dan, you mentioned earlier on about the patents, and someone's asked, how secure they are, and do you see the company filing more patents going forwards?
Yeah, I mean, patents are key to Occuity and what we're doing. Of the 15 patents we have now, say 14 granted, 1 pending. They're structured patent thicket. So some of them come with the measurement techniques, how we measure glucose in the eye, how we measure the actual length of the eye, those sort of things. So that's kind of the core of the patents. We've then got another ring around those, which covers how we align to the eye, because locking onto the eye and knowing we are collecting good data is key to the results we get. And then around those, there's the engineering, so how we scan very quickly, how we know to the nearest micrometer where we are in that scan, those sort of things. So you've got kind of an onion of protection here, where every patent is interrelated to others. It's called a patent thicket. So if someone finds a way around one patent, the other patents still protect what we're doing. So it's very, very hard to compete with Occuity and make the measurements we're doing in a similar kind of way, because there's such an interconnection between the patents we have. As I say, we file always in the UK, Europe, and America, and key patents are filed more broadly than that as well. So that's our 15 current patents. We've got a further 6 patents in draft, at the moment, primarily to do with the oculomics projects. So how we're doing the work on diabetes screening, the Alzheimer's screening, and a few other things to do with retinal imaging as well as part of one of our future fellowship products. So 6 more patents in draft that we hope to file over the next probably 6 months or so, as funding becomes available and as projects start proving themselves out. So yeah, patents are absolutely key to us, and we made sure we've got a very, very strong patent portfolio.
Thanks, Dan. Couple more questions. We've got 2 more left. Are you stretching yourselves too far with all these products?
I know is the simple answer to that. I'll expand on that. Obviously, we're very ambitious as a company, but we've also got a very considered paced program of work. The PM1 is the most simple machine. If you've got an eye, we're measuring the cornea thickness. It's the most analyzed part of the eye. It's the easiest measurement. So we've come to market with that machine first of all, and that's now given us a stepping stone to the AX1, which is measuring the length of the eye. So it's a lateral measurement, or a linear measurement that's going further into the eye. So natural progression from the PM1 to the AX1, and that's an obvious step forwards. As you get into the more advanced machines, they come through in the future, but build on the engineering of the PM1 and the AX1. So although there's a large portfolio of products, each one is an advance on the previous ones and builds on the learning from the previous ones. So just for example, you look at the machine on my shoulder, the PM1 casing, its display, its battery, its charging cradle, that's all been developed for the AX1, sorry, for the PM1, and that then carries through into the AX1 and will carry through into future products as well. So although there's a large number of them, they're paced in terms of their rollouts, and they're all building on the learning from the previous device. So it's a natural walk before you can run kind of program. It's not as if we're trying to bring 4 machines to market simultaneously. Each one's about a year apart, and each one kind of builds on the previous. So it's a sensible strategy moving out there, and not only technically does it move forward, but commercially. So the PM1's now raising our profile in optometry. The X1 will be very, very large. We'll do the similar thing. We'll bring the diabetes monitoring and screening devices to market in optometry. Opticians will know the brand and will appreciate where we are. So there's a kind of growth in our marketing and our brand awareness, as well as the engineering development. So this is all about strategy. It kind of makes sense to build on the previous machines.
Interesting you say that, Dan, because someone else on the kind of flip side has asked, are there any plans for other ophthalmic devices? Maybe an ophthalmologist has asked that, I'm not sure.
There are. So PM1 and PM2 are obviously the first machines. We will build on those afterwards. So it'll probably be, the next machine will probably be a full biometer. So I mentioned earlier on the comparators we use for the X1s, the Lens Star and the IOL Master. These are devices which are sort of yay big, with a chin rest and a forehead rest, and they cost tens of thousands of dollars. There's no reason why we can't build in all their measurement premise into a handheld device. It'll take a little bit of time, and regulatory approvals will take some time too, but we can build all that engineering into a handheld machine. And a handheld full biometer that's used not only for glaucoma, not only for myopia and glaucoma, but also for cataract surgery, intraocular lenses, those sort of things. That's a very, very big market as well. And I think we can manufacture one of those at the current price points of the PM1 and the X1. That'll be, again, a global leader. So we've got other projects in the pipeline here. But again, we want to make sure that we can get the first machines to market, get those established, and then build on that later on. But there's no doubt the PM1 and the X1 stepping stones in ophthalmology will have more advanced machines as time goes on.
We've got one last question now. Then you've rattled through that, well done. And this one goes back to exit. You seem focused on IPO. Will you also consider PE or trade?
Yeah, so I guess a lot of companies in our space, medical devices, do exit via a trade sale. I've had a couple of conversations with people where that's a possibility, but we're far too early for that stage yet. The complexity there is that Occuity has got products in a number of markets: optometry, diabetes, Alzheimer's, and there's no one obvious acquirer apart from a PE firm. There's no one commercial acquirer that would address all 3 of those. So it might well be the strategy is you have a top co that holds the IP, you have an ophthalmic division, a diabetes division, an Alzheimer's division, and then sell those off individually. But there's so many overlaps between the technology between the various divisions that that's not the optimum strategy. A PE sale is possible where a PE house buys the whole company and carries on growing it. But I think in terms of exits, an IPO is still the best one. The valuations there tend to be very high. It also means that early investors can then, because you've got liquid shares, can sell some of their shares and get a return on their investment, but keep some extra shares in the company for future growth. So an IPO seems best both in terms of value of return to investors, but also the flexibility of allowing you to get more value in the future if you wish.
That's it, Dan. You've answered all the questions we've had. So
excellent. Thanks very much. Okay, so it's a pleasure talking to everyone again. Hope you found it interesting. I think a video of the call we placed online as well. So if you want to catch up on any other points and remind us on various bits, please look out for that. But thank you for your time. I look forward to speaking to you again in the near future.